Hello, and welcome to the Metta Hour podcast with Sharon Salzberg. I'm Lily Cushman. I produce this podcast, and today we're coming at you with episode 265. Sharon is speaking with activist and author Shannon Watts, all about her new book, Fired Up. Shannon is the founder of Moms Demand Action, which is the largest grassroots group fighting gun violence in the U.S. She's been named one of Time's 100 most influential people, a Forbes 50 over 50 Changemaker, and a Glamour Woman of the Year. Shannon writes regularly about culture, politics, and women's issues for her Substack, as well as other outlets like The Washington Post, Elle, Time, and The 19th. Her new book, Fired Up, How to Turn Your Spark into a Flame and Come Alive at Any Age, is coming out June 17th. So happy to have Shannon on the podcast. And in this conversation, she starts with the inspiration, the impetus for writing this book, and her personal story, kind of what led her to this point in her life as an organizer, as a coach and teacher. And there's a lot of conversation here about the book itself, which is really like a guidebook how to live a very inspired, connected life, what Shannon calls a life on fire. And a lot of the skills that she has seen in action as a grassroots organizer, bringing that down to the personal level, learning how to make an inventory of our abilities, our values, our desires, and how to kind of marry all three of those in order to lead a really engaged life, whatever your interests might be. There's also some deep conversation here about both Shannon and Sharon's work with survivors of gun violence. Shannon also leads us in some inquiry around working with fears, what's holding us back, which leads to some sharing about Sharon's early days of teaching and her fear around public speaking and how she came through that to be the teacher that she is today. They also share each of their top values and how we can live with a greater sense of what it is that we really care about. Sharon and I both came away from this conversation very inspired, very fired up, and I think you will be too. Shannon closes out the conversation with a short reading from the book, and she's just a delight. So it's wonderful to have her here on the podcast for the first time. Before we get into the conversation, a couple quick announcements. Sharon has a new course coming your way in a very short time, starting on June 21st. She's offering an Intro to Meditation course. And this is something that is both for folks who are really new to meditation practice, but also anyone who has an existing practice who feel like you might benefit from returning to some of the fundamentals of practice to strengthen your foundation. It's a very flexible 4-day online course. We're offering it on a sliding scale so anyone can attend. And it starts June 21st. So you can head over to SharonSalzberg.com to learn all about it, to sign up, or maybe send it to a friend if you think they might benefit. The other announcement is a very different kind of offering that Sharon is doing. She's partnered with Tricycle Online Courses for an in-depth course on the Buddhist personality types. It begins July 7th and features 5 different units. They're all about 45 minutes, as well as 2 live Q&A sessions. So this is a much longer-term program, and it's a topic that doesn't get a lot of coverage, a super interesting arena that is looking at different personalities, histories, and habits, and how we can transform those into their purified states so that they are assets to us instead of challenges. We've got a special 20% off coupon as well for all of you listeners out there. You can use the code 3personality20. That's the number 3, then the word personality, and then the numbers 20. So you can learn all about that if you head over to SharonSalzberg.com. Okay, so let's get into this conversation with the wonderful Shannon Watts and Sharon Salzberg.
Hello, Shannon, and welcome to the podcast.
Thank you for having me. I'm thrilled to be here. I have admired you for many, many years, and to be able to have a discussion with you is just such a treat.
Well, that's so great. I admire you too. And where are you recording from today?
I am in Northern California on a beautiful, sunny spring day.
All right. As we were chatting before, I said, I'm in New York City right now, and it's very cold. But that's all right.
It's that time of year.
It is that time of year, and it's, snowing in Barre, Mass, so I can't really complain. It's too weird. So it's wonderful to have you here today, and we're celebrating the release of your new book called Fired Up: How to Turn Your Spark into a Flame and Come Alive at Any Age, coming out in June of 2025. So tell me first, who did you envision this book being for and what brought it about?
So after starting Moms Demand Action in 2012, which is a gun safety group focused on restoring the responsibilities that really should go along with gun rights in America, I did that for about 11 years, and I decided to step back in 2022 and spent that whole year sort of saying goodbye. And I thought, okay, I'm going to take a long break, right? After being a full-time volunteer and being involved in a really difficult issue, difficult mentally, physically, legislatively, like difficult in all the ways, right? I felt like I needed to sort of replenish, and I was in my basement on the treadmill running, and I looked down at my phone, it's ringing, and it says Maria Shriver. And I didn't know Maria, but I admired her. And so I picked up the phone, and she said, I have a book in print, and I really like what you've done and your voice and kind of what you stand for, and would love for you to write a book for my imprint. And I said, okay, about what? And she said, whatever you want, whatever you've learned. And I thought, when will I have another opportunity like this, especially having just stepped back from Moms Demand Action? And so I spent the entire year of 2023 writing this book and getting to interview over 70 different women, including yourself, about their lives and what made them come alive in their life, and how they've been, what I call a fire starter. And that's just really a woman who has decided to prioritize their desires over their obligations, which is not too common in society because it's set up, right, to keep us working on the stuff it wants us to focus on. And it was such a pleasure and such a wonderful experience. And these women were so inspiring to me, and I got to talk about what I had seen happen to all of these, thousands and thousands of volunteers that I had worked with, and saw them come alive through the lens of activism. And that's really how this book came to be. I think it's an interesting time for it to come out into the world in such sort of a conflicted and painful and chaotic time.
Where did the image of fire originate for you? I love this term, fire starters.
Well, I have a friend named Glennon Doyle. If you're familiar with her, she has a podcast and has written quite a few books. And I was at her house, I think it was like July of 2022, and I was telling her about, this opportunity I had and what should I write about. And I gave her a few books and I told her my ideas, and she kind of said in a nice way, that is very boring. what you're, it sounds like you're writing sort of like a research manual or a clinical dissection. And she said, you are a very fiery person. You have this personality that is, there's a lot of righteous anger there. And that is how I see myself. And I thought that's the metaphor. That is what I'm talking about. Like, how can we live a life on fire? I wanted to, in a way, be bombastic because women are always told to tamp those things down.
Mm-hmm.
And I have seen so many women, come into the organization thinking, I have an obligation to do something. What is that something? And then they maybe take on the smallest task as a volunteer. And then this is the formula, what I call the formula for living on fire. It is marrying simultaneously your abilities, your values, and your desires. And it's these incremental steps that lead you towards something bigger in the company of an incredibly supportive community. And I finally felt that way. I tell the story in the book. It took me until I was 41 years old to figure out what it felt to come alive. I had graduated from college. I was trying to make sense of my parents' divorce as an only child. They'd been married for 26 years. I married my college boyfriend. I think I was trying to start my own family as mine dissolved. I had 3 children before I was 30. And in my mid-30s, I found myself in the emergency room with a horrific case of eczema that, it sounds sort of banal, but this was years long, and it was on every inch of my body, in my mouth, in my ears, on my eyelids. I couldn't sleep. I was miserable during the day, and I couldn't get it to go away. There was nothing that I did that would treat it. And I was in this doctor's office finally, yet another doctor, but this guy was an eczema expert, and he kind of sat down and stared at me and said, like, how much stress are you under? And I just broke. I mean, it was like a dam broke, and I sobbed in his office and realized I was at a crossroads, that I had to make some really tough decisions, that what was making me sick were decisions I had made in my life, and realizing that I hadn't been living a life that was true to me, which is actually interesting because it's one of the most common deathbed regrets across the world is I didn't live a life that was true to me. And it was kind of burning me up from the inside out. And I began to journal after that. I couldn't afford a therapist. I couldn't tell my husband because a lot of what I was feeling was that I had married the wrong person. I was in a career I didn't want. And I just, other than, adoring and loving my children, I was miserable. And that journaling really did lead me out. It eventually led me out of my marriage, out of my career, and into the mindset I needed to be in to start Moms Demand Action in 2012. And that was really how I married my abilities, my values, and my desires, was through Moms Demand Action. And it's how I found my people. And I want to unlock that in other women. I don't want that to be their deathbed regret at the end of their life, that they feel like they didn't burn.
There's something about that image of burning up from the inside and eczema that seems connected somehow.
Yes.
It feels like it's sort of part and parcel of one another.
Well, I mean, I was going to say, you and I have talked about anger before, right?
Yeah.
And how anger can be something that burns you or something that helps you figure out what you burn for.
Yeah.
You can have anger that makes you toxic and vengeful and even hateful, or you can have anger that is righteous and that helps you protect people and find your people and do things that are going to make the world a better place. small or large ways, right? And so I do think, you were talking about burning, like I do think that desire is in that category too. I'm interested in, Sharon, I mean, when you think about anger or you think about desire, if that makes sense.
It does make a lot of sense. I mean, even in the Buddhist psychology where the Buddha says anger, and that's not feeling anger, it's being immersed or overcome by anger, being defined by anger in some way. It said anger is like a forest fire, which burns up its own support. So when it's not kind of a feeling that is leading to a sense of purpose, which is what you're really talking about, and an ability to have integrity and just say no, this is just wrong, things like that. When it's consuming us, when it becomes like the obsession it can easily become, then we burn. And so our own nervous system, our bodies, our relationships, our happiness is what becomes the fuel for the anger. And no one is served by that. We're not served, and the people we are trying to serve are not. So the idea of somehow channeling it and being a fire starter, as you're putting it, is really fascinating because we can do that.
Yeah, and I think to your point, my eczema wasn't the sickness, right? It was a symptom of a life I was living that was making me sick, right? And I think no matter how hard that you try to ignore or bury whatever that energy is, it finds a way out through anger or anxiety or depression, apathy, resentment. And if you sort of embark on this period of intentional exploration, which I did, I did a whole bunch of things in between that experience and starting Moms to Men Action. That is where you can start to find balance. And that is how you start to see what is harmful in anger and what is beneficial.
Like in the, degree of work I've done with communities of survivors of gun violence, including parents whose children were killed through gun violence, I've seen that exact thing, and the power and the incredible compassion that people can develop out of such a complete tragedy, and how much they don't want to be overcome by anger. They don't want to be defined by the anger and the hatred, because maybe they have surviving children, and they're trying to raise them in a way believing in love and the power of love, and or maybe they are serving their community in some way. And it's a very potent kind of discussion. And one of the reasons I love this term fire starters is because in many communities I've worked with caregivers, and I've never liked the word, and because it just seems a little paltry to me, a little weak. And I try to define caregivers, activists as people who are on the front lines of suffering and trying to make a difference. And somehow being able to designate the energy of that and the integrity of that, which is often, it's got a component of what you're calling righteous anger, but not being consumed by it, because then we're just consumed.
Yeah, survivors, I mean, I really think they are the North Star of these movements.
Yeah.
And I was able to do this work in part because I have severe ADHD, right, which helped me to hyper focus on what I was doing. But the other part of it was, I think because I have not been impacted by gun violence, because I wasn't a survivor, I don't know how these people do it. I really don't. I have the utmost admiration for someone who can experience that kind of trauma, be grieving, right in the throes of grief, and think to themselves, how can I prevent perfect strangers from feeling the same pain? I think of people like Lucy McBath, who I was introduced to just a few months after the Sandy Hook school shooting tragedy. She had, her son was stolen from her, Jordan Davis, when just a couple of weeks before the Sandy Hook school shooting tragedy. He was at a gas station in Florida with friends, and an older white man pulled up, didn't like the music these young Black teens were playing, opened fire on their car, and killed Jordan immediately, instantaneously. And Lucy immediately became an activist. And even in the midst of her son's murderer's trial, he went through 2, she still was focused on, how do I fix this? And that is profound to me.
Yeah. So you begin Firestarter by discussing some of the common pitfalls women face when starting this kind of journey, like purpose anxiety or busyness or imposter syndrome. And I wonder if you could talk about a few of these.
Yeah, so there are all these behaviors when I talk to women, like, what holds you back? And it's so often these same things. I mean, they're all based in guilt and shame. They're all based in emotions that are meant to, the system is set up to make us feel guilty or shameful when we're not doing what we have come to see as our obligations, things that we have to do. And therefore, when we begin to apply this formula to our life, when we begin to uncover what our abilities, our values, our desires are, there are things that hold us back. Most of us have a voice in our head that says, we're not good enough, we're not worthy, no one wants to hear our story. What if we fail? That's a big one. What if we're unprepared? They are external obstacles that we can then set up inside ourselves, and they become internal too. I have this myself. I am an absolute perfectionist. I will agonize for hours or days if I feel like I somehow falter. I do a lot of television, and I go back and I just sort of berate myself. And that makes me not want to do it the next time, even though I'm very good at it, even though, there's a reason that I get called to go onto television, because I can tell a compelling story. I can convince myself that I didn't do a good job. And as I said, I interviewed over 70 women for this book. And the most accomplished people that you can imagine, whether it's the president of the PTA or a morning talk show host, an actress, they all have a voice in their head that seems to want to hold them back from doing what it is that would truly fulfill them. And I wish there was a manual for this, right? There's so many things out there right now about what. I love these podcasts about what women are achieving, particularly women in middle age, but there's not a lot of how. How do you take that first step? And then once you start to experience this blowback in your life, whether it's external or internal, how do you get past that? And so I wanted to explain how I did, how I saw all of these women move past it, and just make sure that women understood, and it really could be anyone, but I specifically talk to women, that you need to be prepared that this is going to happen to you along the way. And if you push through that, if you push through those obstacles and come out the other side, then you can keep going.
I want to talk in a second about the formula that you talk about, which you call finding your fire formula. But listening to you, I was reminded of as many people have heard me talk about, the beginning of my teaching journey. I was 21 years old when I began teaching meditation. And the first retreat that my colleague Joseph Goldstein and I were invited to lead was a 30-day retreat. And as you know about our retreats, the schedule is usually people practice during the day, and there's questions and answers, and there's teacher contact, and there's only one formal kind of lecture or discourse at night. So I was completely unable to give any of those talks because I was terrified. I thought, I'm going to be speaking and my mind's going to go blank, and I'm just going to be sitting there in front of everybody, and it's going to be so humiliating. So Joseph, this is a 30-day retreat, had to give 30 talks. And people were going up and yelling at him saying, why won't you let her speak? Why won't you let her have a voice? And he'd say, I'd love a night off. Why don't you talk to her? But I was terrified. And my formula for coming out of it was really loving kindness. as a
Yeah.
perspective, you're using the word empathy in your formula, but, the sense of, instead of they're out there waiting to judge me, and it was more a sense of here we are together. And now I think my mind goes blank. It's like, who cares, like.
Yeah, I think that's interesting. A lot of women have a fear of public speaking. I guess a lot of people do.
A lot of people do.
And I had that as well. If someone had told me I would have to do public speaking when I started Moms Demand Action, I probably wouldn't have started it. That's how afraid of public speaking I was. But as you said, it is about practice, both in the literal and figurative sense of the word. The more you do the thing you're afraid of, the less your brain tells you that you're going to have to, fight or flight. Yeah. And eventually you're able to do it. I could speak extemporaneously now to, 1,000 people because I've done it so much. And the first time I did it, it was a very cold day right after I started Moms Demand Action. I couldn't even hold a cup of coffee in my hands. They were shaking so badly. The coffee was just spilling everywhere. And, I just had to do it again and again until it came more naturally. I think that's like the metaphor for life, right?
Yeah, indeed. So finding your fire formula, can you break it down for us? You say there's a combination of heat, oxygen, and fuel needed.
Yeah, there is a fire triangle that we all learn about in the 8th grade, and you have to have all 3 things in order to start a fire. And this, as we talked about before, it's the desires, values, and abilities. It really took me going through that tough time to figure it out, but also to watch other women have the same experience. And so if you break it down, your desires are your deepest longings. That's the most important part of your fire triangle. It's the part of you that yearns to be seen, that wants to make an impact, that wants to be shared with the world. And for everyone, that's different. And it really does ignite the heat of your fire triangle, just like the literal fire that starts. You have to have heat. And then your values, that's the oxygen that feeds your fire. They're your personal beliefs, your principles. They define your priorities, the decisions you make, the actions you take. And then your abilities. And this is the element that actually fuels your fire. This is your very unique mental or physical gifts. They can be talents, they can be skills. Some are innate, some are acquired. They set you apart from everyone else. If you break down this for me, for example, when I started Moms Demand Action, my desire was to protect people, to be an activist, to change the laws that were allowing these horrific shooting tragedies in America. My values were to protect my family, to protect my children, to protect my community, to stand up for what's right. And then my abilities, I had been in corporate communications for decades. This was what I knew how to do. I knew how to craft a message. I knew how to create a brand. And then when I put those 3 things together, when they were combined in just the right way, it started a huge fire in my life. And in fact, it started fires in thousands of other women's lives across the country who wanted to be part of this organization. When any of these elements are missing, or if you take them out, just like a fire in real life, it won't start or it will go out. For me, this is sort of, and it's like alchemy. It feels like magic. It's a very profound and transcendent force. And for me, at least, it felt like touching the divine. I wasn't able to start Moms Demand Action because I'm extraordinary. I'm a very average human. I started it because I followed this specific formula. And what I know, having worked with so many women, is that everything that you need to activate this formula is inside you, right? You just need this formula to pull it out. And I call this living on fire. And it really is just a metaphor for personal transformation. I don't mean the kind of transformation that's going to make you more youthful or more famous or more wealthy. It's really an internal shift that helps you see 2 things more clearly. What is limiting you? and what is calling you. And that's going to differ from one person to another. It could be something really big and bold. For me, that first big fire was starting Moms Demand Action, but it could be something small and deeply personal. It could just be being open to new experiences and relationships. It could be, bringing new energy or more intensity to what you're already doing. But what matters is that you give yourself permission to pursue those things, the things that you want in your life that will change it for the better.
Well, one of the conditionings I think we face so often culturally is the idea that what we're doing or what we have to offer is not enough. It can never be enough. And so let's zoom in a little bit more on these three components in the face of what is such a prevalent conditioning. Let's start with desire, which can be really tricky for women in particular, given the conditioning that we face. And it seems to me that desire, or in Buddhist terms, we'd call it aspiration, probably more than desire, just because the word can mean different things. But it's very tied to hope or some sense of possibility, rather than feeling kind of beaten down by circumstance or overcome by circumstance or the stories others tell about you, and what you're capable of. So in the book, you say, this desire is the heat that rises inside you when you think about how you long to show up and be seen in your life or in the world, how you want to make an impact, how you want to grow and evolve. So I'm wondering if you can speak more to how that might show up.
Yeah, and I do think heat is a good word for it. And I mentioned that I have severe ADHD. For me, this is a litmus test in everything I do. If I am not interested in something, I cannot focus on it. I cannot complete that task. And that has been the case my entire life. If I'm really passionate about something, or if I aspire to be something, as you said, aspiration, or I desire something, it feels to me like heat. I can actually feel it in my belly. It's something I want to do. It's something I'm called to do. It's something that I know I will feel rewarded in doing. And I didn't feel that until I started Moms Demand Action. But I've talked to so many different women, and it's something different for all of them. I want to be clear that I'm not just talking about activism. It could be a difficult conversation. It could be going to therapy. It could be doing something differently in your life. But the point of the book is to walk people through exercises that helps them determine, what are your desires? Because they are unique to you, like a fingerprint. And maybe you haven't uncovered them, maybe you've pushed them down, but just to start allowing yourself to think about the things that you desire. I've noticed that just in living a life, but also in these conversations I had, men are so often taught to fulfill their desires, and women are taught to fulfill their obligations. Mm-hmm. And what an amazing life we would lead if we were taught to balance both, or to at least prioritize thinking about our desires. So that is in large part what I want women to think about in reading the book.
Well, going back again to my Buddhist training, I mean, one of the things that's emphasized is look at the problem. Look at the absence of a certain quality, and what do you find? And what you find is limitation and suffering and so on, then think about cultivating the strengths that will help you not be so lost in that state. So when I think about the really blunted aspiration, or using desire in the way you're using the term, the lack of desire, it's like a deadened world. It's not really alive, going back to the original kind of imagery that you were using.
Yeah, I think that's right. There is a feeling of aliveness that happens with desire. And I'm very interested in your thought on this too, but I talk about this in the book. There is a difference between fulfillment and purpose. I think a lot of times that we're told this feeling of desire will last forever. I mean, if you're in a marriage, you know that that's not true. I mean, desire ebbs and flows in relationships and in life. And I think there's a lot of pressure to believe that somehow we are called to one purpose for our entire lives. What, you're looking for this purpose. What is this purpose? And I've even had people to say to me, I'm so envious because, you found your life's work. And really, Moms Demand Action was not my life's work. It was one fire in my life, and hopefully there will be many more. What I realized through that is I have a real desire to summon the audacity of other women, to empower women. And hopefully that leads to a whole host of different things that I find fulfilling, but that's not the same as like this one purpose that you're constantly on the lookout for.
Well, I think the singularity of anything is probably a mistake, because, even the way we define success and failure, if you find yourself having fallen down, that's not the end of the story either. And, it's why, as you know, in meditation practice, I so much emphasize begin again.
Yes.
We have that ability, resilience. We can start over. And, so it's not always going to look the same, and that's okay.
Yep. And even in midlife, we can start over. We also, I think, have been sold this bill of goods, particularly as women, that, once we turn 50, we're supposed to sort of fade into the background. And, I feel like I'm just getting started.
It's true. I was reflecting being older than 50, now. And in fact, the retreat center I co-founded is turning 50 next year, so it's outrageous. Really, thinking about how as a young college student, we're supposed to decide on our major and the course of the rest of our lives. And how can that be?
Yes.
Yeah. Fortunately, I guessed right. And I went off to India and studied meditation, but what a bizarre sort of.
But you haven't just done that. When I think about your life, and again, I was so honored to interview you for my book. But what's so interesting about your life is that even though this has been a thread through all of it, you've taken that desire and add your values and your abilities, and you've done so many things with them, whether it's working with survivors, whether it's writing books, whether it's teaching and having organizations. Like, you have had such a robust life, and every time I turn around, it feels to me like you're starting a new fire.
Feels that way to me too. No, that's wonderful. Thank you. And, maybe that brings us to values, because if values are our centering point, then we see new things, right? We see new opportunities or new manifestations. It's like, someone invited me that I'd met once, to go to Parkland, Florida, not all that long after the school shooting, which was the beginning of my journey with that community. And it wasn't something I strategized or planned or, I was responding to a request because it fits so strongly with my most deeply held values. So maybe we can talk about values some. And in your book, you say, just like fire needs oxygen to burn, your desires are informed by the values that give your life meaning.
And what is so interesting is that this is different for everyone too. Hopefully, we're going to start with that you have values.
Right. Well, that's true.
I think that's so important to know what they are. And the book runs you through exercises to determine what those are for you. When we were talking at the beginning of this conversation about the state of the world a little bit, I really think there's sort of a moral imperative to know what your values are and to act on them and to make them a priority and to center them in your life. My value is, and they could change throughout your life too, as we were just talking about your desires. Values can change too. And to me, there's really an urgent need to speak out on the issues that are going to protect our democracy, to keep people safe, to allow people to have free speech. I find that I'm sort of in the middle of this values shift where I was focusing for 11 years on protecting people's safety. And that is still a thread that pulls through, but how do those values apply in sort of the new world that we're in? And when you figure out what your values are and you act on those values and you center them in your life, they really can define the things that you choose to do and the things you choose not to do. I'm really wanting to lift up women right now, not just through this book, but to run for office and to make sure that women are their voices and their values are elevated. That is like a very strongly held value for me right now. So I'm trying to figure out, how do I weave that into everything that I do? And so I just, I'm interested in how you consider your values, Sharon, what you would say the top 3 values in your life are right now and how you're acting on them. But for me, it is this idea that when you don't have a seat at the table, you're probably on the menu.
Right.
And right now, there are a lot of people who are sort of the main course because not everyone is living their values.
Well, I think this conversation, first of all, is very illuminating for me because I am in many ways like the least strategic person in the world. And, my friends often would say to me, who are much more kind of formally organized than I am, would say to me, why'd you say yes to that? And I'd say, I don't know. It was just some intuition that I should say yes. But now, I'm thinking, well, yeah, because it corresponded so strongly with my values. Why did I go to Florida again and again? Why did I have a retreat for survivors of gun violence? And, I think, and often I would say, I'm not sure, someone asked me, but I don't say yes to everything, but I say yes to those things that do resonate. So I want to inspire a feeling of belonging, the reality of belonging, not just a feeling, for others in the way it was so important for myself. So inclusion, compassion, certainly, and the power of compassion, that it's not, sentimental. It's not something that weakens us, that I want to lift that up, not only in my own life, but for communities. So I'd say inclusion, compassion, and integrity, in that I think we live in a world where we see the lack of empathy and integrity so strongly, and it's so cruel.
Yes.
And there's so much coldness and hostility, and it's really something to behold,
Yes.
in such a highlighted way, and feeling we don't have to be that way, and that if we had a sense of connection, it would inform our integrity, because all of our actions could be informed or infused with that sense of connection, rather than so much separation and isolation and self and other. And so promoting that in any way that I can is a really strong value for me.
I think mine right now are courage, right? So standing up for what I believe in, but also empowering other people to do that, even when it's challenging. Freedom. And that can just be having the autonomy to make choices, to live on our own terms as individuals or as a country, but also respect. And I think that's what you're talking about in part, when you're talking about inclusivity and empathy. There has to be a value in the dignity and the rights of everyone. And so I have these exercises in the book that there's so many different values that you can hold, but just knowing what they are, what they have been, what they are right now, and maybe even what you want them to be, and practicing those in your life, exercising them.
And based on that, being in touch, knowing our values, being in touch with them, you talk about abilities, which is that final aspect of the formula, which almost seems like a sort of inventory. Is that right?
It is. It's an inventory. And as I said before, these are really your unique mental and physical gifts, your talents, your skills. Maybe you were born with them. Maybe you learned them during your life, but they do set you apart from everyone else. For me, I have always been a communicator. I have always been someone who knows how to craft a message. And for the first couple of decades of my life post-college, I spent hours and hours, it's the sort of the Malcolm Gladwell maxim of trying to do something for 10,000 hours makes you an expert. I mean, I wrote at least 10,000 hours of press releases from about everything from CT scans to craisins, you name the product, and I wrote about it. And it was that skill set, those abilities, that when I started the Facebook page that became Moms Demand Action, I could put a truly strong clarion call to action down on, I would say paper, but on the screen. And I could create messaging that attracted people from all walks of life, that made women feel empowered and want to stand up to gun extremists. That was my very strong skill set. Certainly, I had to rely on perfect strangers from all across the country to bring their skill sets too, whether they were designers or lawyers or organizers or policymakers, whatever they were, they had their own unique abilities and skill sets to bring to the table. And I have seen, you would think someone who was an accountant, right, that you would wonder, well, how does that apply to activism? And I would see women who were accountants come into the organization and decide to, they're going to do this very kind of left-brained activity. And they're going to be like a data entry manager, volunteer. And they do that really well. And they get support from this new community, and it unlocks their values and their desires. And suddenly they say, oh, I'm not just going to be a data entry lead. I am going to be a chapter leader. And then they say, well, I'm not just going to be a chapter leader. I'm going to run for office, or I'm going to get a different job, or I'm going to get a divorce, or I'm going to ask for a promotion. It just led to all of these different ways of living once they figured out their abilities combined with their values and desires. It unlocked their lives and helped them realize what they wanted, and back to this idea of a deathbed regret, to live a life that was true to them.
Well, it's also connected to feeling, that sense of insufficiency, like what I have to contribute can never be enough.
Yeah.
But it can be such an important ingredient in the whole picture, whatever that is.
Yes. And there's just, so many stories. One of my favorite examples is a woman named Anna King, who I interviewed for the book. And, Anna was raised in an impoverished family in Oklahoma. She got pregnant and married her senior year of high school. She couldn't go to college. And suddenly her son started struggling in school. He had a learning disability. And she decided that was going to be her focus. Her desires were to help her son get through school and get the education she didn't get. Her values were assuring an equal education for her son, but for all students. And her abilities were to go to school with him, to be his note taker, to help translate what he was learning, and then to navigate the school system. She started to learn the school system inside and out. And so here she is during the day at her son's side school. And then after she went to bed at night, she would go work the night shift. And this went on for years. And then those things that she was doing in the school began to get noticed and recognized. And she was asked to become a member of the local school board. And then she was asked to become a member of the district school board. And then eventually she rose through the ranks and became the president of the National PTA. She didn't have a college degree. She got there because of her desires, her abilities, and her values. Because she had so much integrity and because she cared so much about improving everyone's education. She was only the third person of color to ever hold the role. And it wasn't a role she had imagined for herself. She just fell into it in many ways, or you could say she fell into it, or she imagined it and created it. And it ended up becoming this, her legacy. And I think the discussion of legacy is so interesting. And I want to hear, how you think about it and how you define it. Some people talk about legacy as like a big, huge, bold action. It's, an extravagant gift or an accomplishment or maybe even a building named after you.
Mm-hmm.
But it isn't just about your achievements, and it isn't just for men. It's about living a life that is driven by this formula for living on fire. It is a way to assure at the end of your life that you don't have regrets. And we all deserve to have a legacy, to know at the end of our life that we have lived this authentic, audacious life that is entirely our own.
Well, it's so interesting to bring up that idea of one's deathbed, because of course that is inevitable. And I remember someone I knew who had retired and was getting ready to do things he had not been able to do earlier in his life because he was, part of raising a family and had a very, very demanding job. And then he had retired, so he was going to study things that he had not really been able to pursue, that he'd always been interested in. And then he got offered another job, which would be another hugely demanding job. And somebody in his life said to him, my real concern is that you're going to be on your deathbed and you're going to regret not having taken that job. Mm-hmm. And I said, I don't think it usually works that way. That's not usually what usually people say, as they're dying. And I don't anticipate I would say that either, and so I think the word legacy is so big.
Yeah,
that it's kind of scary. But when I think about, say, starting the Insight Meditation Society 49 years ago and counting, our mantra literally for the first year was, we can always sell it if it doesn't work out. And, we couldn't get a mortgage from the bank because it was a long time ago and we were so new. And so 3 people had to personally go to the bank, or they chose to personally go to the bank in this act of tremendous generosity, and took out personal loans so that we could buy the building. And so they weren't that happy hearing us say, we can always give it up, we can always just let it go. But we didn't have to. And it was step by step, and we made many mistakes along the way, but it wasn't like we had this firm, clear vision, of like, what is it going to look like in 49 years? We had no idea, but it seemed like the right thing to do. And it was so compelling a sense that it was the right thing to do, to at least try, that we did it. And so, and clearly that place is a big part of my legacy. And yet it was moment by moment, choice by choice, hanging in there when it didn't seem so great, which happened a few times in the course of the years. So I don't always use the word legacy because it seems too daunting, but living with that sense of what you really care about.
That is a common thing I hear from women. I have this amazing idea, or I have this burning desire, but I have to cross every T and dot every I before I could pursue it. And if I had waited until I knew everything there was to know about gun violence or organizing or the legislative process, I still wouldn't have started Moms Demand Action. And looking at it, like you said, in these incremental steps, which I have seen leads to revolutions, right? These little baby steps or eventually add up, that I took it day by day. And I think just like you were talking about, failure can be a big, daunting or scary idea. So, or you were saying legacy can be a big, daunting, scary idea. So can failure. This idea of what if I fail, and maybe just sitting with that and thinking about, what if I fail? So what? If that's the worst thing that can happen, is that I fail. I have learned enough to succeed the next time.
It's so great. There is a whole section in your book that's about sustaining your fire, which seems especially relevant these days when so many of us are experiencing setbacks in our work, or a sense of, if not chaos, then than even hopelessness about where to go in our manifesting and our trying to make a difference. And so here's some of the tools you're suggesting can sustain us for the long haul. And one of them is reframe failure as progress.
Yeah. I learned a lot about how to keep going myself, how to encourage other people to keep going as a volunteer. You don't take on the most powerful, wealthy special interest that's ever existed and not expect to lose. We lost a lot, but it was important to me to reframe those failures as losing forward. This idea that maybe we lost that particular battle, but in order to win the war, we gained a lot of relevant information. So maybe we have closer relationships with lawmakers. Maybe we grew the chapter because people wanted to get involved. Maybe we recruited more leaders. Whatever the learnings were, it was a way to win the next time. And you know this, having worked with survivors, but also in your own life, in your own practice, self-care sometimes becomes it's a term that can be divisive because there is real self-care and there's faux self-care. And what does it really mean? And what is capitalistic and what is truly helpful and restorative? But if you look at whatever you're doing as a marathon, not a sprint, but also a relay race, that you can hand the baton over to someone else, that the work will continue probably for a lifetime and it will still be there when you get back. And so you do need to prioritize yourself or whatever it is in your life that is at risk of burning you out. I also talk about this concept in the book of a controlled burn. It's this idea of pruning back what no longer serves us, right? Controlled burns are part of a fire cycle. They're known to balance and restore the ecosystem. And after a controlled burn, the soil nutrients are returned. There's the debris is gone. There's new open space for sunlight. And then, suddenly saplings and seedlings begin to grow. And I don't think our lives are much different than that. This idea of removing something, it can be a person or a system or even an idea in your life, right? How do you audit the going back to this word of obligation? Like, how do you audit the demands on your time? What to do less of, what to do more of, what to get rid of altogether? And that could be something small, like making the decision to limit or even get off of social media. I talked to women who found themselves doom scrolling, or they found themselves drinking more during the pandemic, or they found themselves, pressuring them to look a certain way and even buying clothes that were too small, right? And making them feel guilt and shame. And it can also be big. It can be deciding to end a relationship with someone who is not healthy or leaving a job that is draining. I talked to a woman who is a recording artist who her whole life she wanted to be part of a record label, and she wrote a song for the Women's March that just blew up and became, a hit song. And what she realized after she finally got signed by a label was that it was limiting her desires. It was not allowing her to exercise her abilities. The practices were not in line with her values. And she made the very courageous and brave decision to leave the label. No one does that, right? She said to them, I want my integrity back. And she is happier than she's ever been. She got her agency as an artist back, and she has her confidence back. So I do think that, and the book walks people how to do this idea of a controlled burn in your life to maintain your sense of self, to make sure you don't get burned out, and to figure out what's draining your energy, what's taking time and focus away from your desires, and how do you clear space for something new to grow.
You also say in the book, you talk about radiating positivity, which seems like an important message for our time. So I wonder if you could say more about that.
I am someone who is naturally pessimistic. And it isn't too hard for me to start to feel nihilistic during these times.
Yeah.
And hope and positivity and optimism does not come naturally to me. I have, as a Buddhist, I have my own practices that include gratitude, which I find helps me feel positive. But it is a discipline. It is a practice. And not only if you radiate that positivity, if you find things to be hopeful and grateful for, it doesn't just impact you, and it doesn't just help you stay on a path to going toward what you want in your life. It helps other people do that too. I use the issue of gun violence, I think, as an example, which is I've had so many people say to me, it's hopeless. I feel helpless. Nothing will ever change. Nothing will get better. The gun lobby is one. This is who we are as a country. And while I understand the emotion, I also think that cynicism can be an excuse for inaction. It's easier. It is easier to feel like nothing can ever change and I can't change anything than it is to step off the sidelines and to try. And so when you stay positive, and it sounds sort of trite, but it is true. And I have experienced it in my own life. And you surround yourself with people who encourage you to be positive, or because they are so positive. It does lead you into action instead of feeling paralyzed by the cynicism.
And I also want to, there's so many wonderful tools that you talk about, but to choose another one, find your people.
I call this a bonfire. You take your individual flame and you put it with others, and you just create this fire that is more powerful than you could ever have alone. I am an only child. I'm an introvert. I moved around a lot. It isn't super easy for me to find and make friends. And yet Moms Demand Action became the largest real life laboratory for not just figuring out what makes you come alive, but for finding friendships. I would travel the country and meet women who I thought knew each other their entire lives, and they just met, but they had become fast friends because they shared the same values, because they recognized one another's abilities and honored them, because they encouraged each other to pursue their desires. That, it's not just a formula for coming alive, it's a formula for friendship. And so many people since the election have said to me, well, what's next? What do we do? How do we make a difference in this, the way things are right now? And I think the answer is community. To create community post-pandemic in a world that is so online, to be in real life with other people, and not just to have conversations with like-minded people, but to even, go into communities that aren't like yours. I do think that is what could pull us back from the brink. It isn't just about helping us come alive, but it's about helping keep democracy alive. And I have come to this in midlife. The friends that I have made, the people I know through Moms Demand Action, are everywhere I go. And it is that community, it is that bonfire that stays with me, even though I've stepped back from Moms Demand Action. They're the people that are supporting me and lifting me up as my book comes out. And they will be the same people and hopefully new people as well who are part of my community as I figure out what's next in my life. So when people say, what's next? I think the most important thing you can do is to either start or build or join community.
So great. I also want to mention that the book is full of incredibly inspiring stories, which I find so helpful personally, and as well as plenty of different exercises to implement that toolkit. So it really is a workbook in disguise. And I also want to ask you about Firestarter University and what that's all about.
I have found that it is one thing to tell people, like, this is what I've learned and here's how you can practice it. It's another to actually practice it in real life with other people. That's sort of the secret sauce. And I wanted to bring other women together, either who see themselves as fire starters or who want to be fire starters, and create a community that will go with them into whatever is next in their lives. And the people who pre-order the book will be enrolled for free in Firestarter University, which will start in September. We already have several hundred people signed up, which is super exciting. And it will go through the book, and it will feature guest speakers, myself, people who are interviewed and tell their stories in the book, and real life application, accountability exercises for an entire year. And I'm excited from learning from all of these about learning from all these women. And I think what comes out of it will be really beautiful and wonderful. And we were just talking about community. I mean, I that is how I am going to build community in this moment, is through Firestarter University. And hopefully these women will take that flame and each build their own.
That's fantastic. I can't wait to attend the university, truly.
I would love that.
It's great. And I am hoping before we finish, you'll lead us in a practice of some kind to bring our conversation to a close.
Yes, I am going to read the last couple of pages of my book and end with exercises for people to think about. During the first half of women's lives, we are so focused on building our lives with a focus on helping and supporting others that we forget our time is finite. When we reach midlife, we finally have the wisdom to see we hold the power to burn it all down and build new lives focused on what we want. If you take one thing from this book, let it be this: you are allowed, even obligated, to decide how to live your life. It is never too late to decide to live your life on fire. At almost 70 years old, Sandra Cisneros, a poet and author who writes about the freedom that comes from being an older woman, is still looking for her next fire while also preparing for the end of her life, a transformative period that is fueling her creativity. It's like everything in my life has brought me to this stage, Sandra says. I still have a lot to learn, and I haven't written the book I want to be known for, but I'm getting closer with every book I write. I'm in this magical phase of my life that everything I've been leading up to, and I don't know how much time I have. I don't want to waste any of it. When we acknowledge the finiteness of our lives, it can be an important wake-up call, no matter how young or old you are. Life is short and time is precious. You deserve to live so that when you get to the end of your life, you know you were fully alive. That every time you were given the opportunity to choose between your desire and your obligation, you chose the fiery thing. That your legacy is a life on fire. Rebirth is both the end and the beginning of the fire cycle. It's when you rise from the ashes of your past endeavors, carrying the wisdom and experiences that you've gained along the way. Every new first isn't just a fresh venture. It's a continuation of your journey, enriched by the lessons and support you've gathered along the way. Every time you rise from the ashes, you do so as a wiser, stronger, more capable fire starter. To live on fire is a radical act of self-love and defiance in a world that often asks women to snuff out their flames. The stories, tools, and lessons in this book are not just about finding your fire, but sustaining it, protecting it, sharing it, and rebuilding it time and time again until you've built a life so unequivocally ablaze it lights a path for others. This is the cycle of growth, decay, and rebirth, and it's the essence of living on fire. And then the exercises that I put in here to end the book. First, to light the match, to ponder the finiteness of time. Many of us live as though our time on earth is infinite. So imagine that you're told that you only have 1 year to live. In your Firestarter journal, write down 10 things you do and 10 things you'd stop doing. Now write about why you're not doing these things and how you can begin to move toward the life you'd live if you knew when it was ending. And finally, fan the flames. Hold your own fire ceremony. Rituals help us show gratitude for what we've experienced, to acknowledge and let go of what no longer serves us, and to make room for what's next to come. There are many different ways to honor the fire inside you, as well as a fire you'd like to end or begin, but start by reenacting your own mini fire ceremony using a candle. Purposefully light its flame as a symbol of your own fire, and meditate on the flame as you consider what you've already let go and what you want to begin. And when you blow out the flame, watch the smoke until it ends, imagining it represents your intentions.
It's beautiful. Thank you so much for that practice, and thank you for joining me today. It's been such a really uplifting and inspiring conversation that I know will help many out there.
Oh, Sharon, it's such an honor to talk to you. And I'm so grateful for all you're doing in this time. And, I think that the work that you're doing and the work that I'm doing, at the end of the day, it is all about really bringing to light who we are and who we want to be in the world, and shining a light on the very best qualities of human nature. So thank you.
Well, thank you. Thank you for being here, and many blessings to you in the book as it comes into the world.
Thanks, Sharon.
Hey folks, thanks so much for listening. If you're hearing this, you've reached the end of the podcast. So thanks for hanging out with us. It's always a pleasure to be together. And if you'd like to learn more about Shannon Watts, her work, the book, the Firestarter University, her many offerings, you can head over to her website, which is firedupbook.com, firedupbook.com. And anybody that pre-orders the book gets free admission to Firestarter University. So you have a little bit longer until June 17th when the book comes out to get in on the pre-order deal. And for all things Sharon, including her new Intro to Meditation course starting June 21st, you can visit the website SharonSalzberg.com. This has been the Metta Hour podcast, brought to you by the Be Here Now Network. May you be safe, may you be happy, may you be healthy, and may you live with ease.